My guest this week is Kliph Scurlock. Kliph was born in Kansas a long time ago, and his mother was a very talented musician, and he inherited her love for music at a very young age. Despite not also inheriting her talent, he never let that stop him. He started taking guitar lessons at age 4, but never could get the hang of it with his fumble fingers. He next had the brilliant idea to play piano, but was met with the same challenges, and upon seeing the kids are all right at age 7, it clicked. Drums. He played and made a few records and toured a fair amount in the 90s, gaining no notoriety whatsoever, but in 2002 he joined his favorite band, the Flaming Lips, which allowed him to quit his crappy job and devote all of his time to his main love. After a dispute over a poker game in 2014, Kliph was run out of Oklahoma City on a rail and found himself in Wales playing with his favorite songwriter, Rhys, which has involved more records and touring, and what with it being Wales and all, lots and lots of rain. Should it seem that all he cares about is making records and touring, you would be wrong. He also likes movies about music, and it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Kliph Scurlock. Hi, Kliph.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
Good. Happy, whatever, is it 3 a.m. or something there?
It's 10 at night. Oh, I don't know what holidays happen here.
I just like the idea of just burning someone so hard overseas, just like, especially talking about arguably the greatest unreleased music documentary of all time, 2002's MC5, A True Testimonial, that you picked to talk about. Such a great documentary, and we'll get into why it was unreleased as well. But hey, the MC5 were no strangers to pushing bands around that came into Detroit. They had a lot of energy and confidence and swagger. So out of the gate, rank the 3 MC5 records right now, hot out of the gate. Let's make people mad. Rank them.
I go in reverse chronological order. I think High Time was the best back in the USA. Second best, Kick Out the Jams. As amazing as it is my least favorite. Which I hate saying least favorite about Kick Out the Jams, but High Time, that's the one that had a few friends play Kick Out the Jams for me. Like, yeah, there are a couple of cool tunes on here. And then my friend John Cutler, one night I was over at his house and he put High Time on and it clicked. And I'm like, this is the greatest record I've ever heard.
Yeah, I have to agree with that order too. And we'll get into where they were at over the course of the documentary in terms of why these albums sound so different. This documentary was made with full cooperation of the MC5, all the living members. Wayne Kramer on guitar was still alive. Dennis Thompson on drums. And at the time, I believe Michael Davis was still alive. I believe he passed away, the bass player.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Sadly, a few years back. But then they got the Rob Tyner and Fred Smith's widows.
Yeah.
Although I guess, Fred Smith was married to Patti Smith at the time he died, but still had some representation, modern day representation of Rob and Fred, I suppose.
Yeah, it has amazing archival interviews from the past and more current things. But in 2004, Wayne Kramer sued the directors Laura Legler and David C. Thomas, alleging that he was promised he would be the film's music producer, which the filmmakers denied. And it was such a bummer. This film is made with such love, and you get so many great, just pure interviews and insight from the band members who are still alive. It doesn't seem like the kind of project that was going to make a ton of money. It was just made with the best of intentions, but it took years. And so the documentary had played in a few festivals and was ready to have a DVD release, which was highly bootlegged because of that. But in March 2007, the court ruled in favor of the directors, and the Court of Appeals upheld the decision even. And so they've been trying to, over years, to get this a proper theatrical release. They're having a hard time raising money to get the music rights. I mean, things often didn't go right for the MC5, and this also feels like a little bit of a a veneer over the whole thing as well. Like, oh, they were going to get their due and now they aren't.
No, I totally agree. If it would have come out at that time, I think it, yeah, I think it would have done really well. I mean, it was, 2004, 2005, there were a lot of bands who had documentaries come out that suddenly got discovered. I mean, I was in a band whose profile was raised considerably by having a documentary come out.
Which one was that?
Fearless Freaks.
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing the response that people had. I mean, it was, you know, much like True Testimonial, the documentary was made with a lot of love.
Right.
It was actually made by, a friend of the band, Bradley Beasley, who directed a ton of Lips videos and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I mean, um, a lot more people became interested in us after seeing this documentary. And I think the same would have happened with MC5 and, being on Warner Brothers at the time, who owns Rhino Records, that, owns the back catalogs of, the labels MC5 were on. They were planning a big reissue campaign for them to coincide with the documentary coming out. Of course, that never happened. Yeah, it's just a real shame. I mean, I love the Stooges and all, but I sort of feel like, yeah, Wayne Kramer just kind of shot himself and all of them in the foot by just, just ego, as far as I can tell, and maybe a small paycheck, like not even that much that I would think would be worth all this. And
it is such an MC5 move.
It totally is.
It's like you watch this film and you're like, this could be the epilogue of this film, where it's like years pass and then, oh God, really? Like,
well, it's especially as you get to the end of the film, which I guess I'm jumping ahead here, as they're talking about the band fragmenting and splitting up, and just how honest and earnest Wayne Kramer is in talking about this. And it's just,
yeah,
he doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to, it's just, yeah, this is what happened. And this was really stupid. We should have known better than this. And then dude doesn't seem to learn from his mistakes, I guess.
No, it was such an all the interviews in it are they're very self-aware about, yeah, I kind of blew it. I was interested in, my recreational interests rather than music, and owning it, which was really refreshing. And what's frustrating is a lot of times a band like this, you're only going to get one documentary in this lifetime. There's just going to be some bands that are only going to have it done once, and if it's done wrong, it's always disappointing. Like, I thought the Stooges Jim Jarmusch thing, I didn't think it was as good as what the Stooges deserved. It just didn't capture it for me. That was just my own personal thing.
I agree.
This film is very alive and very visceral, and it's just full of energy, and the editing's incredible. It just knows how to tell the story. And I also feel like, maybe you can tell me what you think of this, I always feel like the MC5 are judged as a Detroit band against the Stooges and Alice Cooper. They're always just kind of like they're put in a tier system of who is the greatest Detroit band, when really we should be talking about they're one of the greatest American bands, or one of the greatest bands in the world.
I agree. I think, Big Star could, potentially, duke it out with them for greatest American rock and roll band of all time. But no, I would agree. And I think, sadly, a lot of that comes down to people only know them for the song Kick Out the Jams, which, it's one of the greatest songs ever written, but it's it really only, kind of touches the surface of what they did and what they could do.
So when did you first hear the MC5?
I think it would have been 1991, shortly, like right around the time I moved to Lawrence. The town I grew up in, just we didn't have any independent record stores. Yeah, I mean, the most radical thing you could get was like Jane's Addiction, which,
Right.
not to slag Jane's Addiction. They've got their place for sure, but,
Access was limited.
yeah. So when I moved to Lawrence and started hanging out with other musicians, and, my musical world like really opened up, and, yeah, MC5 was one of those bands that I got introduced to, yeah, in the early 90s.
I remember seeing pictures of the MC5 before I ever heard them, and they completely matched what I thought they'd sound like. You just look at
Right.
them and they're maniacs. And, maybe one of the most confident bands of all time, an attitude of, we are going to conquer you. My loyalty to who is the coolest member of the band shifts. Every time I see a live thing, I'm like, oh, it's Dennis. Dennis is a monster. He's amazing. And then I'm like, no, Rob, look at him. How is he doing that? And then you're like, oh, shit, look over there. Wayne Kramer's like, moving across the stage on one foot. And then, oh, my God, look, Michael's stepping up. And he's, and then, oh, Fred is in a space outfit, painted his face silver. Just incredible. They were quite documented. They were filmed and photographed, and there's amazing live stuff. For a band of their size, it's kind of incredible.
That's crazy. Well, and that the filmmakers managed to get like the U.S. government surveillance footage of them from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in '68. Like,
Yeah.
That's which is just another example of the absolute love that went into making this documentary, that they left absolutely no stone unturned.
Yeah, the film opens at the Grandee, which was a legendary Detroit music hall. Led Zeppelin played there, and Pink Floyd, and Johnny Lee Hooker, and Janis Joplin.
I think it was the place to play in Detroit.
Yeah, and it had like legendary light shows.
I mean, there's a Who, the Who recorded a live album there, although only a couple of songs came out on like a live compendium. But
I didn't know that.
A double disc Who live thing that with some songs from the Grandee Ballroom from '69.
Yeah, it just sounds like the place also that let them rehearse there and cut their teeth and move their way from opening status to headline status, and just kind of winning over Detroit as a whole. The footage of the Grandee, it's decrepit. It hasn't been a working venue for decades. Holes in the floor and ceiling. And it's kind of where the story of the MC5 begins and ends, is at the Grandee. But the origin story of Wayne and Fred being just neighborhood kids and befriending Rob, and them just focusing in on rebellion and through music. I love that scene in the diner where they have an epiphany about what the band should represent.
Right. Where, yeah, they talk about, we'll be rebellious and throw things around. Like, that's not rebellious. And Wayne describes the big fight they get into, and, like, I could smash your face right now. Like, well, why don't you? And that was the moment that, like, okay, we're going to talk about this.
And it's great. The filmmakers like shoot from the angle of the fight, like Wayne acting like he's fighting, and then it cuts to him above, the camera's below, shooting above, like he's Fred Sonic Smith being like, I could smash your face in. But when Rob said, well, why don't you? Wayne's like, and it fucked him up. And the music stops.
Yeah.
And he's like, it fucked Fred up. He realized that violence wouldn't get him an answer. And he said for them, it was deep. And we drove around for 5 hours and talked about what had happened and, you know, what it meant and what kind of band we were going to be. This film is full of stories like that. They're a strange unit of people that came together to create this force.
No, it's true. Yeah, they were, you know, like, yeah, a band of brothers. Really, yeah, it wasn't just, you know, answering an ad in a, you know, local newspaper. For it's like, yeah, Rob, Fred, and Wayne had this bond, and Michael and Dennis came in, but you know, I don't think it could have worked without any of them. Really, it was just some magical combination of the five that all managed to get on the same page at the same time and want to move in the same direction. And
yeah, they were fine with clearing rooms with noise. You know, they were on the same page. There was not one of them who was like, oh man, come on. Like, you know, people want to dance. It was like they were
right.
cool with it. And Michael even says at one point that like the MC5 was a human being. It was a person named MC5.
Right. And this was like 1965, 1966 that they're doing this. So like, you know, you know, so the Velvet Underground were, you know, in existence at the time, but I don't think they would have had any way of knowing about them yet. You know, they didn't have any records out at that point. So, pretty ahead of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a footage of them playing on TV. They're playing like a local TV channel, and they're playing Black to Calm. They're just destroying. The end is just like, and they're just making all this feedback and sound for minutes. And, you know, even the people in the studio running the cameras are doing the thing where zoom in, zoom out, you know, just like trying to make it really psychedelic. The announcer, the host goes, now we know how the Marines feel at the boundary line when the North Vietnamese rocket shells came pouring in.
Right.
It was like, that was their context.
Well, and you can tell that they're playing so loud that it's jarring the cameras, that, you know, the you know, it's the footage is all wavy, because it's actually like disrupting the electricity in the room, which just kind of, you know, like adds to it, to me anyway.
Yeah, the film vibrates. It has so much energy, and whether it's with the choice of sound editing or the visual elements, they do a really good job of even making still photographs feel like they're moving.
I agree. And, you know, as I was rewatching it before talking with you, one thing that really struck me is how well they cut between, you know, interviewing Wayne Kramer, and he starts to tell an anecdote, but it involves someone else. So then they cut to their interview. Like, yeah, I just, just was completely, I don't know if I just never noticed before or had kind of forgotten about it, because it's been a few years since I've watched it, but I was really, just as I was watching it again for, you know, probably the 50th time, was just taken by how amazingly it was edited. And again, it goes back to just what a labor of love it was, and how they must have just spent forever on it. And, you know, rewatching it and like, oh, actually we need to cut to this now because we can, you know, I don't want to pretend I know their thought process, but
the film just buzzes by, and then all of a sudden you're at the end of the film. I just think it doesn't have to be just for people who are familiar with the MC5. I think it's just a great story about, you know, these kids who came up, and all the things they got tied into, you know, which we'll get into in a second when they get together with like John Sinclair and things like that.
And say I've actually turned a lot of friends onto the MC5 by showing them the documentary, and then they're like, "Wow, okay, now I want to hear their music again," and it, you know, kind of helps it click.
It's the music documentary equivalent of handing someone a mixtape.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. That was a great way of putting it.
I wanted to ask you about Dennis Thompson, and you're a drummer. He is
Phenomenal.
an incredible drummer. I wanted to get your insight on what he brought to the band and just his attitude and energy in the film as well.
Well, I mean, number one, he had a ton of energy. And so just having that, that backbone behind the whole thing, just, as any musician knows, if you play with a drummer that's kind of half asleep, no matter how you try, your music's just going to sound like it's half asleep. And, but it doesn't go into it. And I've never found any interviews or anything by him where he talks, in depth about his upbringing. But my guess is that he had a drum kit, had the desire to play, and that was good enough for the band, but he didn't really have a lot of knowledge or a lot of skills coming into the band. And I think that's part of what makes him so great and so integral in the band, is that he grew as the band grew. And just, cause yeah, if you just analyze what he's playing on its own, it's pretty weird most of the time. And you wouldn't think,
yeah,
if you take that playing and put it with almost anybody else, like any other song, and it just would not work. But couldn't imagine, Rocket Reducer with any other drum part than, the constantly like rolling toms and like flipping back and forth between accenting the downbeat and the offbeats. And, yeah, I mean, and I think it's kind of in a weird way fitting that, the last song on the last MC5 record, Skunk, sonically speaking, is like one of my quote on bucket list things or desires or whatever. Is like, if someday I can play that drum part all the way through in one go, I'll feel pretty good about myself.
The other great thing about the MC5 is their personalities are in the instrumentation they play.
Absolutely.
Dennis's interviews where he's just like, "Hey, fuck you, Kiss.
Yeah.
You didn't think of that, you morons." He's just full of just this energy of like, we should be around still. We fucked up.
Right.
We were the greatest. We should still be here. And his interview is just, he's like at one point pointing a gun at the interviewer because they said something a little slightish.
Right. And like, it's just rock and roll. Like, what's the big deal? Like, it's not just rock and roll. It's not just rock and roll. Oh, I wish this thing was loaded.
Yeah, that's his energy is like that throughout. And you watch him play drums and you can imagine they would talk about how worked up they were. And they would say, we were out of our minds by the time we went on stage. And the show had already started before we got on stage. And they just didn't leave anything behind. And I think Dennis's and everyone who's interviewed just has that thing about them where they're like, they still know that they were the greatest.
That is one of the things where, yeah, you mentioned a couple times their confidence, and I've thought about that, but thought, if I was in a band that great, there'd just be, you could be the most humble person in the world, but would just have to step back at some point and be like, man, we're kind of best thing in the world right now. Cool. But let's keep practicing.
Also, when it came to bands touring through, so like a band like Cream would come in, they would just push them around and be like, hey, what do you got? Kick out the jams, motherfucker, or leave. and they would just try to get in these bands' heads. And I can imagine having to follow the MC5 must have been a real treat. That is one thing I do wish was in this documentary, is them talking to Ginger Baker or somebody who might have seen some of these shows and remember, oh, these teenage hoods came in and
Right.
they were intense, because we're hearing it from their side. But just to be a fly on the wall in that back room to see them, such an extension of what they were going to bring to the stage.
Sure. And yeah, I guarantee there was no competition between MC5 and Cream. Like of all the, yes, they're showing all the posters and, it's like the Who probably could have given them a run for their money, like maybe Jimi Hendrix Experience. But yeah, you're seeing all these other ones. It's just like, oh, those poor guys. They had no idea what they were in for when they came to Detroit.
Oh, it's so true. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think the Who would be the one that would be like, we got it. Yeah, we're there. So John Sinclair took on the role of the manager, and he wanted to kind of combine kind of like the yippie movement with his own radical ideology and commandments and the rawness of the MC5. And for a while, it really worked to everyone's benefit. Everyone was all in, and they lived on a commune.
Translove Industries, I think they called it. And that's where they lived on that commune, and they moved up to Ann Arbor, and that's where they met and like became buddies with the Stooges.
Yeah, their baby brother band.
Yeah.
I like that idea of like, yeah, come with us. Come on, Stooges. But John Sinclair, while working with the band, served as a founding member of what the White Panther Party, which was like a militant anti-racist social group, like a counterpart to the Black Panthers. And the band, jumped into it. Some of them were really not super comfortable. They're like, I don't want to mix politics with music. This seems like we're taking our eye off what we should really be doing. But at the time, they were taking pictures with them kind of being militant, like with guns and kind of wanting to start a revolution. It wasn't like they were playing around. They were really serious about it. Like they wanted to push back against the U.S. government and the police, which especially in Detroit were pushing down so hard.
Yeah. Well, and they were, around for the riots in '67 where, a large portion of the town, burnt down and
right. Sent the federal troops in.
As they talk about in the movie, that they were targeted by, the local police and the local government as well, and had their van firebombed, and, they just all kinds of intimidation tactics, by the police to, like centered around, their house that they all lived in, and, constant raids for no reason. And
yeah, and John Sinclair was eventually jailed for marijuana possession and got a really harsh sentence.
Yeah, for selling two joints to an undercover cop. It was a 10-year sentence because, John Lennon wrote that song. They gave him 10 for 2. What can somebody do? I forget exactly how the song goes, but yeah, I mean, I think, an example of just kind of who he was or how he was known or whatever, that, when he got jailed and they, put on a benefit show that John Lennon came and played.
That's right. Yeah, it's kind of an amazing time when bands still needed kind of a figurehead to be a manager. Zeppelin had theirs, the Who had theirs, the Beatles had theirs, and the MC5 had John Sinclair. I mean, he's not Colonel Tom Parker, but it was still a tradition where we need a manager and we need someone who's going to speak for us and help us get this together. It's just kind of an interesting holdover because I don't know any managers' names nowadays.
Right? No, I guess I don't really either. I, I think that round of boy bands in the early 2000s that were all managed by what's his face. Like he was in the news at the time because he had Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and 98 Degrees. But yeah, I think that might have been the end of the superstar manager.
Yeah, I think we need more superstar managers now that are just the household names.
Well, I know a few who think they should be that, but um,
So Danny Fields from Elektra comes down from New York.
I love it. I could watch him talk for days on end. He is endlessly entertaining to me.
Incredible. Part of the Warhol scene. Like his radar was so on, but every band he picked also didn't really make a mark in terms of record sales or a movement until years later. But we're talking about the Velvet Underground and the MC5 and the Stooges and the Modern Lovers. To be him and to see these amazing things, just not have them break, even though you know this is the greatest thing ever. I don't know
Right.
how he got back on a bike and moved to the next band. At some point, I'd just be like, what's the point? Really?
But but he might have just realized that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. So I'm going to keep doing my thing. And, he's definitely, yeah, like you said, like everybody that he championed and got behind, like eventually people caught up with them. So I'm sure whatever doubt, whatever dark nights of the soul he may have had at the time, I'm sure, he's sitting somewhere right now being like, "Ah, told you."
He says, everything in New York, the Warhol scene, it was so effete. We were ready to be slammed by something that was full of blood, lust, and sweat, cum, and vigor. He's like, they had it. He loved the Viking power of the MC5. And, even though he was there for the Velvet Underground, which had so much power too, it was a different thing live than the Velvet Underground, in terms of how they used sound and their bodies. Like the MC5 uses their bodies to create what they make. It is
Right.
like watching 5 like separate rock shows at one time on the stage.
Right. But no, and yeah, and all the footage you see of MC5, like none of them are ever still for a moment. They're always in motion. Even, Michael, who's, seems to be like the quiet one, who's tucked in back by the drums. Like when the camera does focus in on him, like he is giving it his all, and he's back there and he's moving. He's not doing like sweet moves like Wayne Kramer or Rob Tyner are, but he's
He looks so cool though. His hair's swinging and he's just like the force of his bass playing. It's an extension of every part of his body. I will put in the show notes
right.
too the performance of Looking at You from 1970 at Wayne State University in Detroit is incredible. It's a 2-chord song with incredible solos by Wayne Kramer, but this is what we're talking about. Just 5 unique performances coming together, and every one of them is stealing the show. It's like, you don't know where to look. It's incredible.
Well, within the first 30 seconds, like where the camera is, where you can see Dennis Thompson, like within the first 30 seconds of the song, he breaks 2 drumsticks. Like, how many more did he break once the camera moved on to the other guys? Like, how many did he break during that whole set? Which means, how many did he break on average? Just, and yeah, he's playing these, by 70s and beyond standards, these like dinky drums and tiny cymbals, and getting this huge sound out of them.
Yeah.
And there's like one microphone like overhead, and
it's incredible. And even the audience members, it's really fun to watch, like the people standing behind the amps, the people in the audience, their mouths are just, it's open. They're just like, oh my God.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to like witness them, especially if you're not expecting it. It's, I mean, the only thing I could, compare it to would probably be like seeing Deerhoof today. Like you can always, if you see Deerhoof, see the uninitiated in the crowd, because like they're the ones that are just like, what the fuck is this?
So they get signed to Elektra, and at the same time, the MC5 are like, check out our baby brother band, Iggy and the Stooges. And so they're like, oh, Elektra's like, we found two amazing artists at the same time. So Elektra's like, is it Jack Holzman, I believe is his name?
Yeah.
Offered the big band 20,000, and Danny Fields goes, how's 20? John Sinclair's like, right on. And then they're like, offer the baby band 5,000. They're like, 5,000 for the Stooges. And they're like, fuck yeah. And then they're just like off to the races with these two bands. And their first album, Kick Out the Jams, there was a lot. I didn't know there was a lot of hype about the band. I was doing some reading about it. It's not really covered in the movie. The album got to number 30, which was more successful than I thought that album did. A live album by an unheard band. But I think a lot of the attention was on the use of the word motherfucker and the liner notes that were eventually wiped off it that were in the original release of the album.
Right.
Seemed like a lot. Rob Tyner's on the cover of Rolling Stone.
Yeah, they were on the cover of Cream.
Yeah, they come out, the first song, they're doing a Jerry Lee Lewis cover, they Sun Ra stuff. It's just like, it's like 7 songs, right?
8, but yeah.
8 songs. And they're long, and it's messy, and it's great. But to come out with Rambling Rose with Wayne Kramer singing.
And falsetto.
And that falsetto, and it's super sloppy. And you're like, huh. Because that was the first MC5 song I heard, right?
Same.
And I was like, interesting. And I was like, okay. And then it's like a sneak attack. It's like this bait and switch. Rob Tyner comes out, kick out the jams, motherfucker, screaming, and then right into the song. And it's just like the smartest move, actually. Like for them not to lead with it.
Yeah. Actually, I've never thought of it that way, but you're right that it does, it gets you curious, like, what is going on here? And, so yeah, right. You're in tune with it. And then, bam, you get clobbered over the head.
Nothing else sounded like it. I was given it on a mixtape. I had to sit down and pay attention. There was something going on in it that I didn't understand on first listen.
Right. No, I was the same way. I honestly just kind of dismissed it at first. And, it was after hearing High Time and getting it and getting really into them and then going back to Kick Out the Jams that, I finally realized like, oh yeah, this is really brilliant. Yeah. I just don't think there's still today, like really anything you could do to prepare somebody for hearing it the first time.
No. And I don't think the world was ready either, even though it sounds like people were buying it because of the story. There was a lot of stuff, John Sinclair was really brilliant at pushing the hype too, and was very eloquent and very smart and very, dope, rock and roll, fucking in the streets.
Right. Well, and as you were saying earlier that you'd seen photos of them before you heard them and were intrigued by the photos, like those had to have helped, the Rolling Stone, being on the cover of Rolling Stone and whatever photos were in that article.
Yeah. Who looks like Rob Tyner?
Right. I mean, who looks like any of them, but so I can just imagine that I'm some kid somewhere, reading Rolling Stone because it's the cool magazine, and there's MC5, and okay, what?
Right.
Wow, these guys look crazy. Like, of course I'm going to go buy that record.
And they were starting to get arrested for disturbing the peace and obscenity. Disturbing the peace, the violations are fights in public places, malicious intent to disturb the peace through loud and unreasonable noises, and third, using offensive words inherently likely to draw a violent reaction. And you're like, okay.
That sounds, yeah, all three of those track. Yeah.
So they put up this album that says, motherfucker on it. And it's really great in the film. I also like when they talk to their wives and they're like, oh, they said the F word, like,
right.
But it was a really big deal on a record.
Well, it seems so quaint now, but, thinking that at the time, well, I mean, it was a year or so later that, Jim, if Jim Morrison hadn't died, his career and the Doors's by proxy may have been over for him getting in trouble for, swearing and potentially exposing himself on stage. Like, you just, think that
right
now to hear a band say motherfucker on stage seems pretty quaint. Yeah, late 60s, it wasn't like that.
John Sinclair's liner notes are, he's just trying to kick up the revolution, and Elektra were pretty nervous about it. And this really big department store, Hudson's, they refused to carry the record because of the word motherfucker and the liner notes. So the band goes to the local free paper, takes out a full-page ad that says "fuck Hudson's," and they put Elektra's.
They put the Elektra logo on it,
and they're dropped because Hudson's won't carry any Elektra records now. And Danny feels like, oh, guys, you just can't put the record, you can't put the label logo on the thing. Oh, come on. And so that's the end of MC5 and Elektra. Similar kind of Sex Pistol kind of thing where it's just like, all right, well, we're going to find something else.
right?
But the album's reissued without, it's edited without the motherfucker, and they take the liner notes out as well.
Right. Which I wonder, they don't say it in the film, and I've never been able to find out, but I've been curious as to, like, because like you said, the album, went to number 30, which means it would have had to have sold quite a bit. But in all of my years, I have seen 3 copies of that record with the original John Sinclair liner notes. I've seen a ton of copies of it with the amended version, but one copy was on a wall at a record store with a $250 price tag on it.
Yeah.
One of them, weirdly, my roommate had, and my roommate Kitty, who I lived with in Lawrence for about 10 years. And then it turns out it was her dad's record, and her dad had lived at that commune with them in Ann Arbor.
Oh my God.
And so
that's amazing.
Yeah. And so she had this record forever. And it wasn't until, like, I'm rifling through her records, like, oh my God, you have a first pressing and Kick Out the Jam. Oh my God. And I start going into this whole spiel that she doesn't care about, because she doesn't particularly like the record, about this is so rare and this is blah, blah, blah. And she's like, wait, I wonder if this is the band my dad lived with. And turns out,
oh yeah,
it was. Anyway.
Amazing. Yeah, that's just my parents' music. They're square.
Right.
They had a commune. There was a bunch of weirdo garage hippies. So, but the band starts pulling away from John Sinclair, and they get signed to Atlantic. John Landau, who, worked a lot with Bruce Springsteen, had never produced a record. This was the first record he ever produced.
Yeah, you can kind of tell when you listen to it.
Yes. I love this record. I think it has some of the best songs on it.
Agreed.
But the production, I mean...
American Ruse.
Yeah, American Ruse, Let Me Try.
Yeah, Human Being, Lawnmower.
Shaking Street, Call Me Animal, Looking at You. It's packed with amazing songs. The production is really less than inspired in terms of energy. It's very clean. You can hear everything. It's kind of muted. I'm not into the remix, the album things. I know they just did it with Tim recently, and I actually heard it the other day, and it was pretty incredible. Like, they're two different records, kind of.
No, I like the remix, but I found that, a couple days listening to the remix and hearing all the like Bob's parts that had gotten mixed out and like,
Yeah.
oh, that's what he's singing there. Cool.
Yeah.
It's actually like made me fall in love with the original, like even more.
No, I did at AB. I went back and I was kind of like, why is it so different? And they just, they're just basically pushing everything together. Everything is stacked on top of each other on the original reissue. It's not panned like it is in the new thing and sparkly and clean.
Right.
But I kind of wonder, like, I kind of want a version of this album to be like the opposite. Like, let's make it sound like Tim,
Right.
the first version, where everything's just like, let's squish it together. Let's add some bass to it. Dennis is really adamant about just how bad the recording session was. He's like, he had us running laps and eating yogurt, no more drugs,
Right.
alcohol, or motherfuckers. And Michael isn't playing bass on it either.
Right. Which I kind of wonder if that's why the bass is so inaudible on the record, is that, maybe when it came time to mix, that it's
Yes.
just like, fuck, this isn't Michael doing it. Like, maybe we'll just,
Yeah.
yeah, 'cause that's the weird thing, is like the performances are all really inspired. If you turn it up really loud, it's very powerful. But yeah, anything other than like window rattling volume.
And Human Being Lawnmower is like a 2-minute, 20-second prog rock Who song. Like, they out Who the Who in it. It's like, oh, you think you have a lot of changes in your songs, Pete Townsend? Check this out. It is one of the greatest garage rock songs ever. Rob wrote the song, and Rob came in and was teaching it to Wayne. And it goes, dun dun dun. And he goes, cool. And he's like, and then we do it again. And he goes, no, we do it once. He's like, what? And then it goes here. It like, this song is full of one moment things. Like, it never really repeats.
But it's also so seamless and thoroughly composed that,
yeah,
like, if you're not paying attention to it, it doesn't beat you over the head. Like, as much as I love them, like Rush, where it's obvious, like, listen to us. Oh, new time signature. Oh, what about this? It's, like 9 million things happen in 2 minutes. And yeah, if you don't sit and really concentrate, it can just, go by like Shaken Street. That's
right.
Kind of a, conventional pop song by comparison, which is hard to do, which as you would also know, as also a songwriter, to try and like fit a bunch of elements in and make it just seem as smooth as breathing is.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
No, not at all. This is also the era where Fred, he starts wearing the Sonic Smith silver spacesuit with the cape and the lightning bolt on the head. And this is where John Sinclair is also like, man, they've lost the plot. Like, I'm not into this anymore. And they're not into him. I mean, in terms of the politics and the White Panther Party, they just moved. It's time for them to separate. So at this point, they fired him as a manager.
Yeah. I mean, they were just, they were growing and evolving, and, he, like, this thing that they did, and they were breaking out of that. And, but they never truly left politics behind. I mean, the American Ruse is on that record. And then,
yeah,
songs
love
like
that song.
Me Too. And then songs like Future Now on High Time. So it wasn't, like,
yes.
Oh, we're breaking with politics. It's just, we're moving, we're young, and we're still exploring. And
yeah, I think they wanted to have it come through the music rather than like their iconography. I think they were like, let's let the music speak for us. Michael says that quite a bit. He's just like, I just wanted to play music. Let's just get back to the thing of playing music. Like, I'm tired of being hassled by the cops and the government for our music. That I think it's part of the reason why they started going to Europe and the UK a lot, to kind of conquer that territory was just kind of to leave some of that, get a little distance from that.
Right. They didn't have that stigma attached to them over in Europe. They were, um, yeah. I mean, it's kind of ironic and sad that, yeah, they do talk about that in the film, that, it was really Wayne, Rob, and Fred that were, the pushing the politics thing at first, and that Dennis and Michael were, we just want to play music. And, as they start to phase out the politics being at the forefront and get more focused on the music, that sadly, that's kind of when Michael's habits start getting the better of him. And, like they said, he didn't really play much on that record. And, he's pretty open about his habits in the film.
Yeah, which is kind of what makes High Time such an amazing record. They're kind of at the end of some of their juice in terms of wanting to be around each other. Wayne is no longer the leader of the band. It's like kind of a more collective decision. Fred Sonic Smith is starting to be kind of the creative force and songwriter of the band. High Time is an incredible record because it takes the best elements of the two previous records and smashes them into your head. It has elements of free jazz. It has elements of garage rock. It has elements of soul ballads, piano ballads, and incredible backing vocals that you kind of hear for the first time. It's just a really impassioned record. It's just very emotional.
I agree. And do you know the guy that produced that is
he's a British producer.
Yeah, Jeff Haslam. He's a physics teacher, or was in Hereford. A buddy of mine had no idea, like it was his physics teacher, and he said like he learned how to measure the speed of sound using a cricket bat in a field, and had no idea that his physics teacher had produced High Time, had produced Loaded by the Velvet Underground,
Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, Rashawn Roland Kirk.
As I do was kind of, freaking out about the MC5 one night, like, you got to check out High Time. You got to check out High Time. And so he came over and I put on High Time, and he's like reading the liner notes on the record. And he's like, dude, that's my physics teacher, I think. And he's like, asked to use my computer and looks it up. And he's like, holy fucking shit, I had no idea. Yeah, this dude was my physics teacher.
Oh, that's brilliant.
In, like the equivalent of 9th grade.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, he's really smart, but he really brought kind of the band out at a time where they were really struggling. They kind of lost their spiritual connection from the music and each other, and they talk about it quite a bit in this film that, Michael, they're losing him to drugs. Really, drugs, they say, push them apart. And at the front of many of their brains, that was what they were thinking about all the time, rather than the music. And then other members, like Rob, were not interested in it and kind of had to sit there in a car while they went to score. And he just kind of had enough. And so Michael leaves. They get a new bass player, a British bass player, Derek Hughes. And then Dennis and Rob kind of don't want to go back to Europe anymore, or the UK. They're, Rob's got a family, and this is one of the most, that they have a visual representation of a band dissolving is really incredible. Them playing on Finnish television in 1972 as a 4-piece with a new drummer, the bass player, and it's
Wayne and Fred. Yeah. And they're both obviously very miserable too.
So horrible. They walk out like they're not into it, and then they start playing. And Wayne, it's again, this is really masterful of the documentary. Wayne's talking about like, we were frauds. I was singing horribly, and then all of a sudden you hear him singing horribly. I was singing off key. You hear him and see him singing off key, and they barely get through a song, and then it cuts to Sonic Smith, and he just like shakes his head like, no, like this is no good. And it, like, how much longer do we have to play on this show? It's so effective and emotional to see something burn so hot just end with no passion.
Yeah, no, it is. It's yeah, I forgot how just sad the ending of the movie is, but how, you know, great it is that in the way that they put it together, that it is so just, you know, you get so wrapped up in it emotionally that, you know, you feel like you're riding with them when they're, you know, at their height and they're just killing it every night. And then you also, yeah, you can just kind of feel the pit of your stomach drop out when, yeah, you see that finished TV where Wayne and Fred are just obviously like, oh man,
Yes.
why are we here?
You read about that stuff or you hear about that stuff, but to see it and have the bass player, Derek, say, we weren't the MC5. He's like, we're the MC2 plus one plus a drummer. He's like, we were not the MC5
Right.
at all. To have somebody who was in it know that like we were a sham, like, and you know, everybody cops to it. They're like, yeah, we were frauds. This was a lie.
Right. Although, you know, to be fair, you know, that had to have been a strange position for them to be in because they thought the MC5, even with this new bass player, we're going to Europe. And then, you know, Rob pulled out just a couple of days before, I think they said. And then when Rob left, Dennis is like, yeah, I'm not going if
Yeah.
Rob's not going. So then just, yeah, what do you do when you've got like 3 or 4 days? So it's like, you can kind of sympathize with them. It's like, well, we should probably try and make something happen, but
Oh, it happens all the time. I mean, I've been in things that have continued on when they shouldn't with different people, but I've also been in things that have just outstayed its welcome, and you're kind of like looking around on that stage, like we're not saying this, but I think this is our last show, like, you know,
right.
and then everyone's just like, I'm taking my equipment home this time. I'm good. Like, no, we don't need, you know, I'll put it in my car. Then
Right.
to have the documentation of something that was just so beautiful and bright and fearless, to see it unravel in such a way that, like, on paper, yeah, you would think, all right, Wayne and Fred, they're kind of amazing. They'll figure it out. They'll kick some ass. Nothing.
I'm sure if they, you know, had more than 3 days to get something together and, you know, had actually, yeah, I mean, they're pretty open and honest about how fucked up, you know, they were with heroin and whatever else. It's like, yeah, I think given the Wayne and Fred from a few years before where they're like young and full of energy and super hyper focused, yeah, they could have taken those two guys and made something awesome out of it. But yeah, I think it's just, you know, I think that's probably why Rob was like, yeah, I'm not going. This is going to be crap.
Yeah, then they try one more time in Detroit to get it together. They're offered a New Year's Eve show, and they all say yes for $500 because they need the money. And Wayne basically leaves halfway through the set. He just starts packing it. He walks over to Fred and is like, "Yeah, this is not good. I'm out of here," and packs up his stuff. And Michael talks about watching Wayne pack his stuff up and leave, and just how devastating it was. Like, they just knew, like, it's undersold. No one cares. We're not what we were. We're doing it for the wrong reasons. Because a big mantra in the thing is they were like, we weren't really worried about the money. We weren't really worried about being stars. We just wanted to be great. And then just see where the cards fall.
Right. They talked about the first show in London, that big, you know, the Fun City Festival where, you know, they go over and Wayne goes in to talk to the promoter about getting paid. Like, oh, there's no money. Like,
Yeah, Mick Farron of the Pink Fairies brings them over.
yeah. And so they're just like, oh, we're not getting paid. All right, well, let's destroy every other band on the stage then. And, you know,
Yes, and they do it.
yeah, they showed that little bit of footage and it's just like, of them playing Skunk, and it's like, holy shit, they actually played that song live.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you ever have you ever daydreamed about being in a band or being in the MC5?
yes. Yeah, no, I all the time, like, wish that I could find the magical combination of people where it just ceases to become individual people and just become this thing. But it's so it's so rare. I mean, you can count
Right.
those bands on, one hand, and um, I think it's yeah, I think it's just luck to find that kind of combination of people that can all get on the same page. And
Yeah, I don't mean to sound Disney-esque, but it is magical when something like this happens.
no, it absolutely is. Yeah, I mean, and not to say that there aren't currently and haven't been like tons of amazing bands, but they're just on another, when they were at their height, we're just on another level.
Yeah, and like the Velvet Underground, they influenced a ton of bands to harness that kind of energy in rock.
Yeah, I mean, and MC5 were incredibly influential on me. Like, more, I mean, I love the Velvet Underground, but even more than the Velvet Underground, for me, that like MC5, just they were, a band that just like opened my eyes to a whole world of possibilities that I wasn't aware of before. And um, just, yeah, something I've been trying to attain ever since.
I think there's also something beautiful about those bands that burned so bright and hot and didn't leave a massive body of work. I think sometimes, like a lot of my favorite bands put out 3 or 4 records, Mission of Burma.
Right. Velvet Underground only put out a few.
And of course, it would be amazing to have 3 more MC5 records. Of course, that'd be amazing. But there's something beautiful about having something so contained. And, also at a time where, we're talking about the MC5 through the lens of this documentary, but for decades, all we had was the music and a little bit of knowledge about the band, and that spoke volumes.
Right. And there was a tiny bit of video footage like floating around in bootleg world. Like that was one of the things is, I had I'm sure you way more than me, like actually owning a video store. Um, but just friends would like trade videotapes of, you know, uh, stuff. And I'd only seen like a couple of MC5 songs. And so then when I saw this documentary and there's all this footage in it, it's just like, where has this been?
It's totally tragic that this film is just not on everyone's shelves, and that people are going to have to struggle to find it. It's out there. I mean, I see it in record shops and things like that in bootleg form all the time. So at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what the movie is and the subject matter. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many motherfuckers do you give this movie?
Oh, dude, this gets so many motherfuckers it would get an X rating. I mean, as 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 we've discussed, it's just I just think, especially watching it again today to prepare to chat with you about it, even though I have seen it like 9 bazillion times. I just was struck again by just how well the story was told, how well it was edited, how much the filmmakers do not make themselves a part of it
Yes.
at all. You can hear them talk a couple of times, asking questions only when it's relevant, like where you hear the guy ask Dennis Thompson, like, well, what's the big deal? It's just rock and roll. And you could tell the only reason that got left in is because Dennis Thompson's response is to pick up the gun and be like, I wish this was loaded. And, without, so you need the context. No, I really, I just, again, like we mentioned, like the Grateful Dead documentary, I watched that, even though I do not like that band at all. I've tried a million times, and it's a great documentary. But so yeah, it's like I'll watch any music documentary I can find, and most of the time, like you were saying, the Stooges documentary, like it's cool, but it's not great. Like this is great. This
Yes.
is a great documentary, and as you said, somebody that has never heard a note of the MC5, it's still just, it's a great movie.
Every band deserves a documentary made about them this good.
Well, a lot of Oasis doesn't, but the great bands, the great bands absolutely do. Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned the Who a couple of times, and their documentary that came out, it's like, it's unwatchable. Like pretty. I mean, it's not. It's very watchable because it's still the Who and see all this great footage of them. But
is this a newer documentary?
Yeah, it came out. Oh, I want to say somewhere around 2008. It's called Amazing Journey, where like.
Yes, I remember that. Yes. Yeah, I forgot about it. That's
exactly.
So right.
So yeah, no, I would rate this 15 motherfuckers out of 10. I just think it's just yeah, and amazingly done from start to finish. But then just the fact of how much I love the MC5, and to hear all these snippets of songs that I love that I have an emotional attachment to outside of the film, that then when they play along with. And that's the other thing, is I think all the music is like perfectly placed. It's always the right song at the right time, the right section of the right song at the right time that fits the emotional arc of what they're telling with that portion of the story. That just like Human Being Lawnmower, like so much of it can just go by unnoticed because it flows so well that you'd really only notice if there was like a choppy edit or something was out of sync or something just didn't add up. But the fact that, it's just, it's all there. I couldn't think of anything that I would have done, would have wanted them to have done differently.
Yeah, agreed. It's a 15 motherfucker film out of 10.
I would say. I dock it one motherfucker for Wayne Kramer's shenanigans that got it. Actually, that's not fair. That's not fair to the film. But
we'll just slip one motherfucker into his pocket when he's not looking.
Yeah, there you go. That fucking motherfucker.
Yeah, and still give them the full 15.
Yeah.
So
I still can't believe that I would love to know what was actually going through his mind when he started all this stuff. Because yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, I think they would be regarded so differently today. And I think, obviously Rob Tyner and Fred Smith were already dead, but, and not to take anything away from the Stooges, I think they're awesome. But, the fact that there was a version of the Stooges that, it was like, the three living members and Mike Watt, who couldn't get anybody better, went out, toured as the Stooges, and could, just, raise their profile. And it's a shame that there hasn't been the equivalent for the MC5. And, the Stooges will work with the record label to do, a 9 CD box set of every take that they recorded for Funhouse, or whatever.
Good point.
Like I know, because I had breakfast with a guy at Rhino several years ago that for years, all of the MC5 tapes were lost except for some copies. And so the original CDs that came out were taken from like copies, but with High Time and back in the USA, they had to take some songs off of records because they didn't even have any tape copies, but they found all the multi-tracks, all of the original mixdown tapes. And like I said, we're preparing for a big reissue campaign, and
it's a loss. It's definitely a loss. And, I hope that at some point this film finds its way into a proper release, because even as is, in this edited form, it is a perfect documentary about these 5 incredible weirdos.
Yeah, they just happened to find each other in Detroit. Like, if they hadn't been lucky enough to find each other, like, what would any of them have done with any other group of people? Like, probably.
Oh, Rob says I would be in the film. He says armed robbery. I'd be in jail if I didn't join the MC5. He's like, that was my trajectory.
Yeah.
So fortunate on many, many levels. Thank you so much, Kliph. This was awesome. It was so good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been lovely to chat with you again. Wish we lived closer so it wasn't so sporadic.
Hopefully you'll get over here with Gruff again. That tour you did last time was great. So
thanks.
Say hello to everyone over there.
Will do.
And I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thanks so much.
Awesome, man. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday, so be sure to search for the show on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the show. And if you've enjoyed this, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate and review it as well. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!